So it's been quite a journey. So you started from US Department of Defense through startups to big corporate IBM and back to startup. Thanks for sharing your journey. I think it's really interesting. So throughout your journey, I think you discovered this thing called architectural decision record, or let's call it short ADR. So maybe tell us more. How was the story? How did you discover it? And how you've been a prominent supporter of that, I guess.
Yeah. So back on my IBM team, we were a fairly small team, a fairly young team as well. So I was one of the more senior engineers on the team, but most of the 7 or 8 developers were right out of university. So maybe 1 or 2 years working in professional software development. I guess as I briefly alluded in my story at the beginning, we were getting into cloud-based microservices. We're getting into AI. We were getting into cloud-based technologies, search technologies, the AI. Everything's moving really quickly. And we're struggling with some of the basic knowledge sharing, basic design principles, things like that I think a lot of teams struggle with. But with us being fairly young and then really in a bit of a pressure grinder, there was a lot of pressure to deliver and move quickly at the time with the early days of Watson. That's the situation. I'm open and looking for any kind of new techniques to bring to my team for getting us to think more about architecture, think more about design. That's when I came across this Twitter thread one day. I think it was Nat Price sharing a tool that he'd written for recording this thing called ADRs over the command line, just a very simple command line tool. I'm like, okay, this sounds neat. What are ADRs? Right? Dig in and I find all this cool stuff that sounded really great. So brought that back to my team. Hey, I found this thing called ADRs. Should we give it a try? And of course, my team is great. They're like, yeah, let's do it. What's an ADR? So I had to teach them all that and I guess learn myself because it was my first time with that. I guess that's the discovery and then bringing it in to try and solve some problems.
So maybe in the first place, for people maybe who may not be familiar with this thing called ADR first, maybe what is the definition of ADR? Is there a good way to summarize what is an ADR?
Yeah. So the cool thing with ADRs, the idea, the way that we practice it today comes from this blog post by Michael Nygaard. He wrote the Release It book, which I always think was the companion book to my Design It. So he wrote this blog post that kind of described this experience report, this idea that he was playing with, which was, okay, what if we write down a single decision, a single architectural decision? And what if we write it down, it's just a simple markdown, very simple kind of text file. What if we keep the format very straightforward in the style of a pattern, like a design pattern from Christopher Alexander? If we describe the context of the world, the forces that are at play, maybe they're business forces or technical, they could be political. These are the things that are kind of acting on our decision, what it is that we're going to do. And then as a result of applying this decision, describe the consequences. Again, very like, how does the world change after we've done this decision? So it could be trade-offs, it could be quality attributes promoted, it could be new risks or benefits. So that's an ADR really in a nutshell, kind of in its essence, a really simple text file describes the context, the decision, and the consequences of that decision. I think the real cool part, the thing that was really different, because design decisions, architecture decisions, they've been around for probably 5-6 years at least. The study of architecture decisions had been a focus in the research area for a number of years before Nygaard's blog post. The thing that was different though was keep it simple and then put it in the version control repository. Put it right in your Git repo next to the code. Those two things really different than what anybody in the architecture community at least had been talking about up to that point. So I guess there's the long answer of what an ADR is.
As we dive deeper later on, if I can just summarize in a little bit, it is like a simple text-based decision records that you store in version control. And you kind of like capture single decision, right? It's not like a very overarching architecture document that could be how many hundreds of pages long. And it captures 3 things: context. What is the context when you make the decision? And the decision itself, and the consequences, maybe the trade-offs and maybe the few things that you consider during the discussion and you decide, and then you capture what are the consequences of the decisions. So thanks for sharing this in a good way, right? In a summarized format. So people should consider ADR, but what is the true objective of it? Is it just to capture decision records for people to refer back? Maybe in the next few years, they forgot what they did and they just look back. Or is there any other different objectives that you think ADR could help?
ADRs are great for capturing those decisions. And yeah, you're right. It's one decision at a time, which is really amazing and powerful because one decision is easy. And then you just do that every day. And then you look back and next thing you know, you've got 30, 40 pages of documentation of all these great design discussions that have happened over the past however many months. And that's great. Like capturing these design discussions and kind of describing the rationale for the design is really important. But what I really like about ADRs, and the thing that I think is actually even more important, is how it facilitates that discussion about design. And it really puts design kind of at the forefront, front and center. So it's kind of putting your team in this amazing place of being, I guess, where you're talking about design, where you're talking about architecture. That's really where the magic starts to happen. Recording the decisions is great, but the fact that you're coming together as a team and talking about them and really focusing on that is even better. I don't know. That to me, I think that's even more important perhaps than the decision itself.